Uh, Brilliant. Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone on Zoom, and hi, everyone on Instagram. Welcome to our separation anxiety event. Quite a few of you have already joined, and I'm sure a few more might come as we get going. So today we are very lucky to have Abby, an experienced dog trainer and behaviorist, joining today to help us understand how to tackle a very common issue of separation anxiety. Abby has been working with Darlie for over a month, and we wanted to bring her expertise to a wider group to help dog parents like ourselves to understand how to deal with those challenges. As a lot of lockdown puppies, Darlie has been suffering with separation anxiety really pretty much from the beginning. Like many of you, we read all kinds of books, forums, we watched YouTube videos, but just kept getting quite confusing and incomplete, and sometimes even advice that felt a bit cruel. So a couple of months ago, after a particularly bad experience, we decided to really take it seriously and contacted Abby to help deal with this issue really once and for all. Before we started working with Abby, Darlie could only really stay by herself for maybe 3 to 5 minutes. And even sometimes we thought she was doing okay. Really, after a few minutes, she was really would start howling and crying, which was really heartbreaking to watch. And I even had occasions when I had to rush back from a theater when I heard how badly she was crying. Exactly. Yes, talking about you. Uh, so and really after we started working, we've been working with Abby for about 6 weeks now. We're now able to leave Darlie for over an hour, and quite often she would just stay calmly by herself and even take a nap. And we've even been out for a meal now a couple of times, which is really quite exciting for us to be able to do. So it takes a lot of work and commitment, and we've got a lot of good days and sometimes bad days, and it's really good to have someone like Abby to really guide us um, through that experience to make sure that we get it right. And I hope really that Abby's perspective she'll share with you today will help you really understand separation anxiety and know how to deal with it a bit better. Make sure next time you're in the restaurant, you're not glued to a puppy camera, to make sure that your pup is doing okay. So what we'll do now is I'll hand over to Abby in a minute, and we'll have probably about 35 minutes presentation, then during which we'll go over the main material. And thank you for those who submitted questions in advance. We'll look to cover a lot of those topics that you raised during that main session, but we'll also have about 15 to 20 minutes at the end to cover off any additional questions. So what would be best to do, if you're able to post your questions during the talk, if you just post them to chat, either to me or to everyone in the chat, either in Zoom or on Instagram, and we'll pick those up and look to answer them directly. So without further ado, let me hand over to Abby.
Hello, everybody. I'm not sure if they can see my video on Instagram yet, Peter. I think you might need to invite me onto that bit.
Oh, yes, I think I can see your request
I think
now.
that's working. So welcome to those of you on Instagram, and those of you on Zoom should be able to see me here. So thank you for that wonderful introduction, Peter. That was really nice of you. And I'm thoroughly enjoying working with Peter and Darlie. And without further ado, I think we will start the presentation itself. So let me bring that up for you guys. Peter, can you just thumbs up to let me know you can see that okay? Perfect. Thank you very much. So let me move my screen. So welcome to our separation anxiety workshop. Helping you out is myself. Peter's kindly sharing that on Instagram for you guys, so you should be able to see that on his screen so you can follow along there as well. So just a little bit for you guys about myself. My name is Abby Huxtable, as Peter's already told you all. I'm a dog trainer and I live in East Yorkshire. I specialise in pet dogs, dog sports, and obviously the separation anxiety work. I do work in person with local clients as well as remotely via Zoom and various other devices. I do classes, packages, and one-to-one sessions as well. I live with my husband, and you can see our group of pets here. We've got 2 cats and 2 border collies, so those are the pictures just on the screen for you. So let's go straight into what we're all here for, which is that separation anxiety. So the Oxford English Dictionary definition of separation anxiety is anxiety provoked in a young child by separation or the threat of separation from its mother or main carer. And a lot of the studies and foundations of our dog training work is actually based on studies on children, child psychology, and child learning. So in dogs, this relates to the dog and their owner as their main caregiver. There are 4 main forms of separation anxiety, and your dogs can absolutely present multiple ones of these, although they tend to have a clear favourite, for want of a better term. So those simply are isolation distress, hyperattachment, frustration or FOMO, fear of missing out, and barrier frustration. So we're going to have a little bit look at what they all mean. So first of all is isolation distress. That tends to be your most common form of distress, and that's what we see in most of our cases. And it is where the dog displays anxiety when left alone. So they can cope if they're left with another human, sometimes left with another animal, be that a cat or dog, but generally it is when they are totally alone. And this is what Dali presents. So this is what Dali has. Our second form, and the second most common, is hyperattachment. And they do often have a little bit of both. And this is where your dog is particularly attached to one person. And this is more common in single people households as well, when there is just that single caregiver. These dogs will show distress even if other people are present, but their main person is absent. So this can be quite hard on that main person because the sole responsibility falls to them. You do see it, as I've already mentioned, with those isolation distress dogs as well. And we have seen it a little bit in Dali, in that she actually finds the leave slightly harder when Elena leaves versus when Peter leaves. So we have just adapted our training accordingly. The third one we talked about was frustration or FOMO. So fear of missing out. This is where it's more that they get frustrated that they're left behind and they're not getting involved in whatever activities you're doing. Slightly different to the actual distress. It still presents very similarly to isolation distress, so it's often hard to distinguish. But with FOMO, you tend to see that though the initial stages are equally hard, once you're through those initial stages, a FOMO dog will progress quite quickly because they understand the difference with when they're coming versus when they're staying, and they learn to deal with that. And the easiest way to deal with that, which we did do a little bit early on with Dali, is giving them clear signals as to when they're coming with you versus when they're staying behind. This can be some kind of visual cue in the house. It might be something as simple as getting them dressed in their equipment first, the lead, harness, whatever else, if they're coming with you. So if they don't get dressed, they know they're not coming. Those sorts of small little tweaks. And our final type of separation anxiety, final one that comes under this big umbrella, is barrier frustration. And this is where your dog is frustrated by being shut in somewhere. So this might be something as simple as a crate or a pen. We find a lot of anxious dogs do better with more space. Some don't, some like that security, but a lot of them do better without. And that barrier could even be a door to a room or the front door to your house. So it depends on what that barrier is. Okay. So how do you know if your dog has separation anxiety? These are our major signs and symptoms. They would bark, whine, howl, or cry when left. They may chew or be destructive when left. You come home to things destroyed. And that is because that anxiety is coming out and it needs that outlet. So they destroy stuff because it makes them feel better. It's that outlet for that stress. They may soil or toilet even though they're already toilet trained. This with puppies is not quite so definite because they might not be fully toilet trained yet anyway. But if your dog is toilet trained and is toileting when you're absent, it's a good sign that they've got separation anxiety. Attempts to escape or self-harm. So scratching at that crate or scratching at a door, biting at that barrier, trying to break through the barrier, again, major signs. And then our last one is that they're showing big signs of anxiety when you are preparing to leave or getting ready to leave, or at a time when you would usually leave if you have a regular schedule. Now, there are some more minor signs, more subtle signs as well, that you might not notice necessarily or pick up on, but using our technology, using our videos, then we can actually notice these signs clearer. And these are the sort of signs we as professionals would help you out with. Things like hiding when you're getting ready to leave, withdrawing away or backing away from you as though they're upset with you, pacing up and down whilst you're absent, freezing, just getting frozen and not being able to move, licking their lips, trembling or shaking, ears pinned back, looking worried or looking sad, yawning and other displacement activities such as scratching. And those are quite subtle ones because it's confusing whether they've got an itch or they're tired. Panting, drooling, or low-level whining. So not your full-on howl, but just a little quiet whimper or little whine. And how would you know? How would you recognize these signs? Obviously, the major signs you would usually see or hear as you were getting ready to go, as you left. You can use cameras or video. Loads of us have pet cams nowadays, and that's a brilliant way to just check in on how your pet is doing. And it's a very important aspect of the training we do as well, because we can monitor that training and monitor how your dog is doing during that training. You might speak to your neighbours. They might hear them whilst you're out. And those signs could just be initially at the beginning, and then they go quiet. They could be periodic during your absence, or they could be continuous throughout your absence. And you yourself might start to observe those minor signs, now you're a bit more aware of them, as you're getting ready to leave. Or just after you come back from having left, because your dog is still showing those stress signals. So before we get into how we do actually treat this and work with separation anxiety, I just want to go through a few of the common myths that you'll see in various forums, on the internet, some slightly outdated trainers or other professionals such as your vets might have recommended, your friends might tell you. These are the things that we think might help, but in reality, unfortunately, don't really help. And just here, I would just like to insert that sometimes they can show some of these major signs if they are bored rather than truly distressed. So they might start destroying stuff if they're bored. They might start barking if they're bored because they're looking for attention. They're unlikely to do prolonged howling or prolonged trying to escape, but it is still possible if they are bored. So that is always one thing we do consider early on if those dogs are bored rather than anxious. And some of these are based on boredom rather than true anxiety. So a common myth that is really sad, that does make me quite unhappy, is to let your dog cry it out. And there have been numerous studies, especially on children, but on dogs as well, that show how psychologically distressing it is for that infant or dog to be left to cry it out. Because that distress is just building and building, and they're suffering and they're upset and they're struggling, and we're ignoring them. So that really does not help separation anxiety at all. What you sometimes see is the dog gets so distressed, it actually shuts down and it goes quiet and it lays down and it hides and it stops because it's not working. You're not coming back. It's trying to call you and you're not coming. So it gives up. And that again is a very sad psychological state to be in. So that is why we absolutely do not encourage you to cry it out. The radio. This is a nice idea. Leave them with some noise in the background, bit of company, but your dogs know the difference between you and the radio. The radio can help if they are hearing outside sounds whilst you're gone and it's disturbing them. So then they maybe start to bark because they've heard something going on. So the radio would just help muffle those sounds so they're less likely to be triggered. But your dog knows the difference between you and the radio. Clothing. So again, another common one is to leave an article of your clothing with your dog because then they've got your smell with them. They know the difference. They know the difference between radio and you. They know the difference between your old t-shirt or your pajama top and you. So a genuinely distressed dog, unfortunately, this isn't going to be enough because it doesn't replace you. Sleeping or attention. The fact that you let your dog sleep with you or you spoil your dog will cause separation anxiety. Total myth. Don't worry about that in the slightest. My dogs sleep with us and neither of them have separation anxiety. The younger one has barrier frustration, but we manage that and he's fine. So it won't cause it. Separation anxiety tends to be a predisposed condition. So certain dogs with certain personalities will suffer from this anxiety. And a dog of the same breed from the same litter might not. So what you have done or what you do is very unlikely to affect that. So don't worry about spoiling them and sleeping with them. They're part of your family, it's fine. It won't affect separation anxiety. Leaving them with foods or toys. So those of you that have anxious dogs will often notice that when they're in an anxious state, they will not take food and they will not interact with toys because they're simply too anxious. So leaving them with those foods and toys, if they're in their anxious state, won't make a difference because they'll ignore them till you come home anyway. Sometimes the food or the toy may distract them for a short while as you do leave, but what happens when they've finished that food or got bored of playing with that toy? They then realize you've gone and they then get anxious anyway. Okay, so it can be a bit of an emergency stop, an emergency help if you absolutely have to leave them and they will accept the food or the toy, but in the long term, it's not actually going to help that anxiety. Limiting access. So this again links to your crate training, but it also comes back to your hyper attachment. If your dog's hyper attached to you and you limit access to yourself, will that then break that bond and help them to survive without you? Well, no, because you're basically teaching them to cry it out and letting them be upset, and you're forcing that separation when they're not ready, so you're causing distress. So no, it's not really going to help, unfortunately. You actually want to allow access, but be boring whilst you're there, because then they're learning that actually you're not that exciting to be with, and that sometimes it's more fun to be away from you. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Crate training. So some people will say, crate train your dog and they'll be fine left, or stick them in the crate and they'll be fine. If they've got this anxiety, the location isn't going to make any difference. If they've got barrier frustration, it might make it worse. If you teach them their crate is a great, fun, lovely, wonderful, safe place to be, yes, it may aid your separation training, so long as you do the rest of the stuff as well. And then the last one, oh, I just pop out for 5 minutes, then I go for 10, then I go for 15, and we build it up that way. If, like Dali, you can cope for 5 minutes, brilliant. Yes, 5 minutes will be your starting point. But if you can cope for 5 seconds, and then you're panicking for 4 minutes and 55 seconds that's left of those 5 minutes, that 5 minutes is no good to you. So what we do here is how we actually treat it. So what the training we use is sub-threshold training, and we use gradual desensitization to build up the leaves. So what those fancy terms mean is your threshold is the point at which your dog becomes anxious. So we work sub-threshold. We work below that threshold, but we gradually increase that threshold to progress the amount of time that can be left. I've got managing absences on there because that is quite important. If you can manage to not leave your dog by using various things that we'll talk about, it makes the training much easier because they're not experiencing that separation distress. They're not experiencing that anxiety. Therefore, your training, your sub-threshold progression is much quicker. If you have to leave them, then every time you leave them, they experience that bit of distress. It means your progressions are going to decrease, then increase again, but decrease when they have that distress. Counter conditioning is in there. And what counter conditioning is when they see something negative, something scary, or experience something scary, we then follow that immediately with something good. So we often use it if they're scared of people or other dogs. We'd let them see that dog and reward them with a treat or a fun game. See that dog, reward. See that dog, reward. See that dog, reward. So that that dog actually comes to mean something fun. When I see that dog, something great happens. So that dog must be a good thing. But we try not to use this as much in separation work unless it's a really, really severe case, because we're making it a good thing, which can lead to excitement. We don't want our dogs to be excited and anticipating us leaving or coming home specifically, because if they're anticipating and excited for us coming home, which we're pairing with a good thing, then they can be alert and aware and on edge, waiting for that homecoming. Whereas we want them just to be, well, chill, meh, you're gone, okay, that's fine. Oh, you're back, yay, that's good, I like that. But it's okay, it's fine. So we do use counter conditioning a bit more carefully. What sort of aids do we use as well? I've already mentioned the technology. So having a pet cam, or even just a device to video or have a live feed going, is really useful because you can track exactly how your dog is doing whilst you're out. And we're aiming to be sub-threshold. So if your dog is reaching that threshold point or getting close to that threshold point, you know to return so we don't push them over that threshold. And then you can feedback the videos to your trainers, to the group, to the app, to whatever method you're using to help you. Then that video can be assessed and can be reviewed to give you feedback and extra pointers from that professional point of view. I do want to talk a little bit medications and supplements here. Medications can be brilliant when working with separation anxiety cases. Not all dogs need them, not all owners want to use them, not all vets are totally on board with them, but a lot are. And the idea with the medication is it just puts your dog in that better frame of mind to be able to cope and to increase those threshold levels so that we can progress through the training a little bit quicker and a little bit easier. There are various supplements you can get as well. Some work for some dogs, some don't work as well. Your prescription medications tend to work better because they're a bit stronger. And the eventual aim is, if possible, to wean them off those medications as well. But some dogs use them long term too. We talked about managing those absences. So trying not to leave your dog whilst you're going through the training so you don't have those setbacks. And this is where your friends, your family, your borrow my doggy, your daycare, your pet sitters, your dog walkers are really, really useful, because when you have to leave, you can make those arrangements for your dogs instead. And then finally, trainers. Professionals such as myself that can guide you through the process, that can cast our professional eye over how you're doing, that can make those tweaks and those adaptations as we need to, and that can guide you when to push, when to ease off as well. So worth bearing in mind. A little bit more detail about how we actually do the training. So we always start with a baseline assessment. That is to assess the level at which your dog can currently cope when you're leaving. That might be you getting ready to leave. That might be a few seconds. That might be a few minutes. You might be lucky and it be nearer an hour. But it's just finding that starting point with which your dog's comfortable. So that is our baseline for our future training. We're going to go through and discuss some training plans and have a look at an example in a minute. And that is just rough guide as to how we work them and how we progress through them. And that is to just manage those progressions. So we're getting those progressions, but remaining below that threshold as well. Progressions and regressions. Regressions are totally normal. So they happen. And again, we'll show you in a moment a bit more example. We'll use Dali as that example for that. And then expectations. Unfortunately, because we are doing sub-threshold and gradual desensitization, it is quite a long process. It's gradual. But if you manage those expectations, then you get the rewards. So let's just look in a bit more detail at these. So for your baseline assessment, we would always assess what type of separation anxiety they have, because you would tweak the training slightly depending on that. You'd find that level they can currently cope. And the rough guide that a trainer would take you through, or if you do an app or a group, or you're even trying it yourself, is that for each successful session, you would increase your target time by between 5 and 20% for the next session. Obviously, that is a fairly large percentage gap. So that's where your professionals would help guide that, depending how well your succeeded with the session, if there's any little tweaks we need to do, things like that. But yeah, it's roughly a 5 to 20% increase each time you succeed. If you have an unsuccessful session, our training session, then we ideally drop back to the last successful session, because it's a good indication that we've simply jumped too far for those dogs. So we would just repeat that session if we've gone too far. Right. So looking at training plans a little bit more, the data on the left, these little door work, flitting, spread the love, do it yourself, create, settle work, and leaving cues. These are all things that we look at around our training plans. So they're to help with more your individual distinct separation anxiety types and little background exercises to do. The main aim of the training we do is to get you out of the door, because that's what you really want to be able to do, is get out of the door and have your dog happy and content. They're not going to throw a party, but they're going to be okay left behind. So that's what we look at on the right-hand side of this. So I'll go through those first, and then I'll flick back to the other ones. So the training we do, pardon me, is we aim to train 5 days a week. And that 5 days a week means that you get 5 successful days of leaving, but they get to, and you as well, get 2 rest days, because that is where they have time to process everything, de-stress if they've got that little bit of latent stress building, readjust and adapt so that your next training days are more successful. And Peter himself will know how important those days off have been, because sometimes if we do a few too many days in a row, she does start to get that little bit of that stress build up, and we say, actually, we need a day off now. We need to just give her a rest day. The aim is to have a new and slightly increased, as long as we were successful, training session each day. And those may be various different sessions depending on the time of day, the person doing the leave, the situation of the leave. But we try to do a new one each day, so we're continuing that progression. And as I've just mentioned there, they can be variable within the day. So you may get 2 or 3 slightly different programs. So Peter is on a slightly different one to Elena. And now we're on to longer leaves of longer durations. We also vary those target durations to make it easier for them to fit the training in, because it's quite hard to fit in an hour leave every single day when you're doing other things in life. And it just helps keep that progression going. We usually include warm-up steps. So these warm-up steps are basically short little steps that get you out of that door, but make it really easy for your dog to get out of that door. So it's just enabling you to have those little successes, but also making you leaving a bit boring. We're getting those loads of little steps of you coming and going. They're getting bored of you coming and going, so that by the time you do your long leave at the end of the session, they're already in a bit of a whatever state, because you're just coming and going anyway. Some dogs find that hard. Some dogs find those warm-up steps a bit stressful. So some dogs we won't or will only do very short ones. But again, having that trainer or that support there can help you judge that. And then you report back. So Peter and Elena and Dali report back to me at the end of each training session or at the end of the day as to how everything's gone. I can review their videos, they give me little updates. I can then decide how much we want to push by, if we need a day off, if we're going to just drop a little bit and make sure she's happy before we push again. And it's really good for you to keep that record as well, because that helps you track your successes and your progressions. So let's just flick over to the little exercises we had around that. So if your dog really struggles with you simply getting ready and going out the door, you might start just doing door work, just in and out of that door. If they've got any sort of barrier frustration, you might just practice popping in and out of the room, or popping their crate door open and shut. So it's just building up those base foundations to make sure they're happy first. Splitting is a little game that we do to help promote them not following you everywhere all the time. A lot of anxious dogs or Velcro dogs will follow you literally wherever you go. So this flitting game is to just teach them that actually you're quite boring sometimes, so they don't need to follow. So that promotes them just watching you go, but not bothering to follow. Spreading the love is for those hyper-attached dogs. So we're trying to spread that attachment out a little bit more and encourage them to be happy with other people rather than solely relying on you. And that might be a friend, a relative, a partner, a trusted pet sitter, anything. But we're just trying to help them spread those bonds a little bit so they're not just on you. The do-it-yourself game is another little game to promote that independence. You give them an activity or a toy or something away from you. So they're choosing to move away from you to have fun, get something rewarding, and be that little bit more independent. Building up your crate or your settle work so that they are able to be more chilled and more relaxed in their bed or their crate as you're moving around, as you're doing stuff, because that will contribute to them being more settled if you do leave. And then those leaving cues. So this is the things your dogs notice. Oh, Peter, oh, that's it. It's better now. I was going to say your Instagram went a bit scary there. I can see it. I'm just not sure how to get onto it. Anyway, we'll come back to that one. So that is things like putting on your shoes, picking up your coat, brushing your hair, putting your makeup on, picking up your keys, going to the toilet. All those little things we do before we leave that your dog picks up on without you realizing, and that means to your dog you're about to leave. So they can be distressing in their own right. The reason we focus on just getting out of the door and we don't tend to worry about leaving cues, some of the training methods will do leaving cues first, which is absolutely fine to do as well. But the reason we focus on getting out of the door, if the getting out of the door fact becomes less scary, all those things that predict you're about to go out of the door don't matter anymore, because you going out of the door doesn't matter either. So we tend to circle back to them if we need to, once we've got out of the door successfully and consistently. So this is a little example of a training plan that Peter and Dali did. And you can see we've got those 7 warm-up steps and then the long leave at the end. So those warm-up steps are nice and short and simple. Getting out of the door, short period, coming back in. Dogs staying nice and relaxed as we do that. And they're remaining calm as we do that. We know those have all succeeded. By the time we get to step number 7, they're a bit fed up with us hopping in and out of the door. They don't really care anymore. So then we can do that long number 8, and it's more likely to be successful because we've done those little warm-ups. And some dogs will always like a little warm-up. Even though we're on long leaves now with Dali, sometimes she's just a little bit unsettled when they're getting ready to go. So they'll do a couple of little warm-up steps just to help her settle, and then the long leave is a lot easier for her. And we did find that we've kind of dropped the warm-ups mostly for Dali now, but as I've said, sometimes they just help her out a little bit. So that is fairly typical of a training plan, and it's that long leave, that number 8, that we would progress by between 5 to 20% each time that she has that successful session. The warm-ups also enable you to gauge their mood and to gauge how well they're doing. If they're struggling on the warm-up steps, they're not going to succeed on the long leave. So you will probably just suspend that for later on and try again when they're a bit more settled. Or you could do some extra warm-ups to help them get settled. So it's a good indication of how that longer leave is going to go as well. Oh, why is that not moving? There we go. So expectations. It is a long, slow process is working with separation anxiety. And that is why it is hard for owners. And that is why only a few trainers specialize in it, because it is quite hard. It's a process. You know, we're doing that gradual desensitization. It can be frustrating. It's hard to commit to not leaving them because of life. So it is tough, but it is possible and it is doable. It's individual to each dog. Obviously, we know that each dog varies a little bit on what they succeed at, what their actual type of separation anxiety is. So some dogs will progress quicker than others. And Dali is doing really, really well. She has really progressed very quickly and is doing really well so far. But the statistics do say that the average success rate is 6 to 9 months. So it is a commitment. You can have various packages. The top international trainers have apps. A lot of trainers have membership groups you can join. There's intensive packages, which is what I tend to do, which really focus on you and get those training plans and give you that support. And those leaving cues, you can then add those in. Sometimes you need to add them in, sometimes you don't. So that is part of the process as well. Right. And then progressions and regressions. We're going to have a little look at this with Dali as an example, but it is totally normal for them to regress sometimes. It's part of the learning process. They do that learning curve, and then they need to plateau a little bit to take that learning in, absorb and process and adapt. And you may even see a slight dip whilst they do that, and then they progress again. That time off is so important to allow that adaptation and that progression. But we have also noticed that if you have a break from training or pause training for whatever reason, that can also lead to regressions. You sometimes need to build up slower. If you've got to a little dip or a little plateau, you just need to do your training accordingly. So you do your 5% increase instead of your 20% increase to make it easier for them. And the average is about 10% increase that we go for in general. So this is a nice little chart for you all that just shows Dali's progressions and regressions. So along the bottom axis is the dates. So those are the training periods we've gone through. And then up the side is the duration, so the amount of time that we're leaving her for. So you can see initially she had quite a nice little curve upwards, but then those yellow dots, we had a few little regressions, and then we had a bit of a bigger regression with those red dots just around that kind of 2nd or 3rd week there, where she was just adapting and processing. Then again, we've had quite a nice little upward curve, but just a couple of little hiccups in there. And that's normal, that the more they adapt to the training, the less regressions you tend to see. The reason it's got a bit spotty and a bit more spread out recently is because, as I did mention briefly earlier, now that they're on long leaves, we are mixing and matching the durations slightly. So it's less of a time commitment, but we're still getting those successes. So that's why it's a bit more dotted about. But you can see there's much more green ones, green successes amongst there. Couple of little memes that I love you all to just remember and think about in relation to separation training, but training in general. So the one to the left of my screen, I'm not sure if that's mirrored for you guys, but the ladders. So the image with the two ladders. So we talk about this subthreshold gradual desensitization, which is those lots of small steps, those lots of little rungs on the ladder. And you can see that that person on that side is right at the top of their ladder because their steps have been small enough for them to succeed. The bigger ladder with the bigger rungs, they've not even got off the floor because that expectation and that initial step is too big. They're experiencing too much distress that they can't succeed at the first step, so they're never going to climb that ladder. This one on the other side, the graphs. So what people think success looks like is that continuous steady arrow, whereas we have just discussed this is what success actually looks like, is a leap, a plateau, maybe a slight dip, and then a big leap, a plateau, and a slight dip. And that's the same in anything. You'll know from your learning yourselves that you'll understand something suddenly, and then you'll maybe be a bit stuck, and you'll have to figure it out, and then you'll get another big progression. Yeah, that's great. Peter can just see that one a bit more. So that's pretty much coming to the end of our presentation. We're going to start our Q&A. I know we've run a bit over because of my technological difficulties, but we'll get into that. But this slide is just some recommended resources for you. So the top one is my webpage, just so you can have a little bit of a look. Contact me if you want to. The next one is a Facebook page that I actually admin on, and we give out dog training advice and support, and it's all qualified professional trainers and behaviourists that admin on that page. So it is professional, up-to-date, force-free knowledge that is being shared with you. And we do have a special separation anxiety section of that as well. The next one is Julie Naismith's Separation Anxiety Group, and that is a very good support group just for owners to comment on, to help each other out, to get a bit of advice from separation anxiety trainers. And again, it's a really nice tool to use if you're not quite at the point where you want a full trainer. The website is an American trainer. So Julie Naismith is English and lives in Canada, and she's one of the world leaders in separation anxiety. And it's her courses that my qualifications are through. The other main world leader is Melina Di Martini, and she's an American lady, and she has her own website. She has online resources. She has a book, which is on the books list. And again, trainers can qualify via her programs as well. They're still both subthreshold gradual desensitization, just slightly different aspects and looks of certain things. So really good resources for you all there. And then just my contact details for you. If anyone wants to get in touch, if you have any further questions after the presentations, if you want to ask anything, if you're interested in help or advice, then those are just my contact details there. So let's have our Q&A. So oh great, Peter's just posted those links in there for you all as well. So they're in the chat box if anyone just wants to copy and save those. But I do believe you're going to get sent the recordings, but also hopefully the presentation notes itself. All right, Peter, I'm going to mute myself. Just
yeah, you're already gonna mute.
Oh,
yeah, well, it's actually it should be fine now. So I know we've got only a few minutes, so we'll try and keep it very short. So if one first question from Andrea. So if the baseline is really low in terms of even the pup doesn't want reacts to the person getting ready, how would you approach that?
Yeah, so that would be where your leaving cues are useful. What we also consider in our getting out of the door work is what leaving cues you can chop out. So can you put your shoes on 20 minutes before you're actually going to start the session and just sit around the house in your shoes and go about your normal life in your shoes? If you've got a door where you need your keys to get back in, can you already have your keys in your pocket before you start the training session? So you're minimizing those leaving cues as much as possible to enable you to get out the door. But if some of those cues are unavoidable and you have to do them, then it's lots and lots of little repetitions of those cues where you're not necessarily leaving them either. So you pick your keys up, go and make yourself a cup of tea. Go and sit on the sofa and check your Facebook. Go and do a bit of work. Pop your keys down, carry on as normal. Pick your keys up, do the same again. So you're just gradually making those cues boring, and those cues don't automatically mean you're about to leave your dog, because sometimes you do other stuff when you give them that cue.
Okay, brilliant. And I'll just combine a couple of questions from Tanya and Rachel. So if you're expecting some bigger changes, such as, for example, new baby or moving house or anything like that, is there a way that you can prepare and anticipate that?
Yeah, moving house, generally, dogs adapt remarkably well. So that's the easier question. Things like having their bed and their bedding in a similar place as possible. So if they currently sleep in the kitchen, put their bed in the kitchen at the new house. If they currently sleep in the crate with you in your room, put the crate in your room with you. So you're minimizing them as much as possible. The actual move-in day is usually the most stressful time. So if your dog can be with a sitter, a friend, or a relative whilst you move, then you just bring them back to the new house and carry on as though it's normal, tends to be easier for them. The biggest factor there is more outside sounds. So if you're moving from a quiet location to a busier location, they might find that a bit difficult, or vice versa. Baby, it's really good to get everything set up and visible and introduced to the dog as much as possible before baby comes. Often dogs are sensitive to your hormone levels, so you will see little changes in behavior as you yourself change. And it's good to have a practice baby as well. So something like a doll or a teddy bear or something that you carry around, and maybe play little YouTube sounds out of, such as that baby crying, just really quietly initially to get them gradually adapted. Think about things like the baby equipment, set up the Moses basket, set up the nursery, get the dog used to all of that, and get them used to walking with the pram or pushchair as well. So you're just getting the dog acclimatized before the baby actually arrives as much as possible.
Well, very interesting. Yeah, a lot of different things to consider. Just a couple of other quick ones. Is it better to give them access to more rooms or limit the access?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Say that again.
Is it better to give them access to more rooms, or is it better to limit the access?
Good question. Let me just look back, because I just thought of something else, separation anxiety related with the new house. In that, we often see a regression. If you have done your separation anxiety training in your current house, then you move house, you will see a regression, because they've learnt to cope in your current house, they've not learnt to cope in the new house. So it's just taking your training back a few levels and building it up again, and they will build up much quicker because they've done it before, but that is normal. So coming to leaving them, most dogs find it easier with more freedom. And that's because they're not confined, they're not contained, they can go where they feel comfortable to go and where they feel happiest whilst you're absent. If you take away that option, it can add to the stress. There are a few dogs that do love their crate, love their pen, love a certain room of the house, and then feel more comfortable and more secure in that location. So it depends on your dog a little bit. It's worth experimenting, but generally we find more freedom is better.
Okay. Yeah, and we're certainly experimenting as well. We haven't quite worked it out what works for us yet. What do you do if your dog follows you around in your house?
So we mentioned the flitting game earlier, and that is a brilliant one for that, and also the do-it-yourself game. That second Facebook page, the Facebook Dog Advice and Support, has both of those games for free on that page in those files. And we can probably just stick the link up there somewhere. There is another group that has a very similar name that does not give quite such good advice, so do be wary of that. But those are basically little games that are easy to play that just build your dog's confidence and independence away from you within the house. If anyone does want copies of those, I do have copies, so I can send them over as well. So just let me know on that one.
Brilliant, thank you. And I posted the link as well. Laura is asking, do you train at the same time every time, or do you tend to mix it up?
Yeah, really good question. Initially, with the lower levels, when we're just starting out, we aim for their easiest time of day. So the easiest time of day is normally when your dog is settled and chilled, but not asleep. If they're asleep, they're not aware what's going on, so they're not aware of the training itself. But if they're crazy or zoomy or excited for a walk, they're going to find it very hard to remain settled whilst you leave. So initially, yes, pick your times and be consistent with that time to get those initial successes and that initial progression. But then after that, we want it to be realistic to real life. We want to be able to leave our dogs whenever during the day or evening we need to. So then we would start mixing and matching more.
Okay. Yeah, and we are starting to mix it up as well. Yeah, in our training for sure. And just
initially, Dali found the evening very hard. Like later on in the evening, she was doing well during the day, but she struggled with the evening. So we've done a bit of work on that, and she was fine the other evening, wasn't she? She was totally relaxed.
Yeah, definitely. And just a follow-up question from Laura: do you allow the dog access to the front door during the training, or is it better to put them away in some other room?
Yeah, really good question again. I like your questions, Laura. Generally, again, this is a bit of a generalization based on the statistics and the dogs various trainers have worked with. Generally, them being able to see you leave helps. And a lot of dogs actually like to come to the door and will also wait at the door in those initial early stages, because that's where you've left from and that's where you're coming back. So yes, mostly having access to the door, so long as it's safe, is absolutely fine, and we generally encourage that. A few dogs find it's the actual act of separation, the act of leaving, that is hardest. And this is what we're playing about a little bit with Dali at the moment. So in that case, sometimes no, them not seeing you leave is then easier, because it's that actual act of leaving that is the stressful part for them. Once you've vanished and gone, they're then fine. So there is a few that, yes, we would not let them see. We'd have them elsewhere in the house and you would just go. But most prefer to know what's going on and understand what's happening. And they do that by seeing you leave and seeing you return.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I think I don't think we completely figured it out. I think we're sort of trying to work it out, but yeah, we generally let her see the door, because we just generally picked up that I think a lot of the time just the uncertainty is confusing to her. So yeah, that's what we found as well. And I think there might be apologies if I missed one or two questions, but I'd like to just ask a general question. I know we're quite a bit over. So a general question, I think a lot of people are wondering, dogs that might be a couple of years old, they've never been left alone, or maybe older. and they only had bad experiences in actually attempting the training. So how would you suggest they actually start?
Yeah, so we have actually found, and I think you guys have experienced this a bit, Peter, in that if you haven't had to leave them from a young age, when they do mature a little bit and get that more natural confidence, they then actually find the leaving process easier, so long as you are working under that threshold and under that worry point. So it would be what we've chatted through. So start off, do your baseline assessment, try getting ready, watch those signs for anxiety, those major signs, those minor signs. Step out the door, step straight back in, read those signs, see how they're doing, step back out for a second, step back in, read those signs again, and just gradually test that in longer increments till you find that point they're starting to show signs of worry. And when you're at that point, you come back a step, train at that step, so they get the successful leave, so that they're content, they're okay, they're coping. Then add that little bit of that extra percentage next time you do it, and just gradually build that up. But if you've never left them, chances are your baseline will actually be reasonably good, because they've never experienced that distress of being left. So you should be able to start a slightly higher baseline than dogs that have already experienced that distress and know to worry that their owners are leaving them.
Okay, brilliant. And okay, I'll definitely last question now. Again from Laura, she's definitely on fire. She was asking what could you share a bit more about your programs and what does support from you actually look like?
Yes, of course. This is a little bit of a plug for me, so thanks for that, Laura. But yes, my programs, so I mainly offer intensive programs, have 4 different levels. So the baseline level is just a pay weekly program. So you would pay for your initial assessment, and I use Zoom for most of my programs, but we can use other methods, Google Share and various things like that. And once we've done your initial assessment, you would then get daily plans as to what you would train that day. And you would feed back to me each day as to how that has gone. And if you want me to review any video footage, I review that as well. And then I plan you the next day's session based on how that has gone. And Peter's just popped my links in there for you as well. That's just in the Zoom chat box. I think he'll probably pop them on the Instagram for you as well. So the next level is a 4-week program, and that's a nice starter program if you're a bit unsure where your dog is at and how much you want to commit. So your initial assessment is included in that program, and then you get a 4-week daily support of those training plans, the feedback. And we also have regular in-person catch-ups, so we can just chat through any questions you have. I can do a little leave with you at the same time, and we can do all of that. 6-week, yes, 6-week plan is the next level, so similar but a bit longer, and then the 12-week plan is the longest one if you feel it is going to be a long-term project for your dog. And the benefit of the longer plans is they are slightly cheaper for you. The weekly fee works out cheaper because obviously you signed up with me for longer, so I give you that discount for doing so. I do allow flexibility within that. You can top up from one plan to the next and just pay the difference, because we've already done all that initial work together, so it's then easier for us to carry on. If you get to the point you're happy to continue on your own with minimal support, I do offer a little monthly fee. So it's a monthly membership, and that's just a small price. That gives you access to just check in with me when you need to, throw any questions at me you need to, but you kind of manage your training sessions and do your training plans for yourself a bit more. So yeah, we've got a bit more in there. Someone's just said, what's my availability? At the moment, I have got space for a couple more regular clients, but it would probably only be a couple more at this stage, and then you'd be on the waiting list, just because I do the in-person and the classes as well. I don't solely focus on separation anxiety at the moment, so I do have to balance my time a little bit.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. And we really appreciate you sticking with us also for about 50 minutes longer than originally planned. We really enjoyed all of your questions, and hopefully you enjoyed the session as well. It was really fun to prepare for this session, to hear all of your questions, and really enjoyed also all of the time working with Abby and seeing Dali progress from really completely basic beginner to really getting up to an hour or more, which has really been really impressive. So thank you very much, Abby, for your time, for your expertise, and yeah, we'll carry on speaking with you, but hopefully, yeah, a few more of you will find it useful as well. And yeah, feel free to get in touch with Abby if you're interested. I'll pop a few links in there in the chat as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, everybody. I've really enjoyed this.
All right, brilliant. Thank you very much.